Good morning, colleagues. We are 10 minutes late, so we have to start. The first item of business this morning is a current affairs debate on the situation in Belarus, a threat to the whole of Europe. The debate will last 1 hour. And speaking time is limited to 3 minutes for all members except the first speaker, chosen by the Bureau, who is allowed 7 minutes. The debate will therefore end by 11 a.m. when we have the high-level panel and interactive debate on the Istanbul Convention. In the debate, I call first Mr. Emanuelis Zingeris. Emanuelis, you have 7 minutes. You have the floor.
Dear friends, can you hear me? Very good.
We can hear you.
First of all, I would like to congratulate that all of you are safe after such terrible pandemic. It's such pleasure to see you all in the chamber and outside. Secondly, coming to the subject, I would like to raise the questions related to Belarus, and thank you for signing down to be speakers. Mr. Nemeth, Belarus state terrorism become a threat for all Europe, and we are actually neighboring countries don't know how to use all democratic opportunities to rebel against this threat by Lukashenko illegal regime to the people of Belarus and to all Europe. I would like to say that we're considering how to defend our borders against illegally increased, artificially increased by Lukashenko orders, illegal immigration, with all good heart to the poor people from Syria and Iraq. We are on their side. We are humane people, but not artificially created situations on the borders with hundreds and hundreds illegal immigrants like a revenge for our support for democracy. Revenge to Poland, revenge to Lithuania. So, and the stabilization of all Europe in the future with such acts. So, just I try to explain in my fraction that the aeroplane Athens Vilnius were kidnapped, and Protasevich and Sapiego, 2 young, promising Europeans, were kidnapped and tortured, especially to change their views and showed on TV. I think we should use the same measures used against black colonels in Greece. We have recently visited of Greek Minister of Foreign Affairs to Lithuania, and we discussed the measures. And now the measures are declared yesterday by European Union, sectoral sanctions, and more like 80 personalities under sanctions personally. That is only beginning. So blue sky above Belarus is empty from European Union side. And I try now to tell you, all of you, just looking to our fractions and looking to our party system in Europe, help the party members, Social Democratic Party members, Mr. Statkevich, who is in jail, Christian Democratic Party members, Mr. Remeshevsky, and other friends. I just try to ask Mr. Potsy, Tini Cox, Mr. Schwabe, Jacques Mer, to concentrate on destruction of party system in Belarus and people who are now under tortures and 10, 12 years in prison. Can you imagine? 12 years prison for Mr. Statkevich, the leader of Social Democratic Party. It's unimaginable terror against women, rape of women in jail, and don't apply the rules that people from neighboring countries cannot speak, people from Poland and Lithuania, about Belarus. We have right to speak when we are under clear attack of Belarusian regime, supported actually by Kremlin. And we would like to ask you in the future to try to call the early elections and make a pressure on Belarusian regime to call elections. And before I'm going to say Żywe Belarus, long live Belarusian democratic people, I would like to ask you to have a report and rapporteurship in our house after Christos Purgurides make fantastic report about killed people like Viktor Gonchar and other people in 2008. After this brilliant report by our Cypriot friend, we should have a real serious rapporteurship. I know that my Finnish friend is doing well, preparing some basic remarks, but we need to have new basic report about a new stage of repression and violence against 9 million people in the middle of Europe. From my point of view, Lithuania and Poland supporting and the European Union supporting Tikhanovskaya, elected president. She is achieved and she is welcomed in every capital like elect president. And we are all here on her side and the side of Mr. Franek, Wieczorka, and on Mr. Latushka's side, who is now residing in Poland. I would like to say we should have every session names declared, women, children, men arrested by this most brutal regime through all story after Second World War and probably after the story of black colonels in Greece. So I would like to encourage you, dear friends, to focus attention and not let Belarusian terroristic regime to make stalemate impression that we cannot influence through the borders this new concentration camp established under blue sky of Europe. So from our point of view, we need to remind that Polish minority is under threat, under terrorist threat. Polish minority leaders refuse to go, some of them, to Poland. And I would like to encourage you to say about basic framework of our set of values. That is Council of Europe. Not only European Union, not only European Parliament, but Council of Europe is responsible for, even not in the member countries, Belarus is not a member country, but in middle of Europe for all future stability of Europe and the sake of democratic future of Belarusian people who just apply to be democracy for the new elections.
Thank you,
in Belarus.
Emanuelis.
Thank you, Mr. Nemeth, and that was my message.
Thank you. I call next Mr. Poche on behalf of EPP. You have 3 minutes. Mr. Poche, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues, la situation en Biélorussie en matière de respect des droits de l'homme n'a cessé de se dégrader ces derniers mois. Des milliers de personnes, des membres de l'opposition, des journalistes ou de simples citoyens ont été battus, arrêtés, torturés et condamnés à de lourdes peines de prison ou ont été contraints à l'exil. Cette répression brutale représente une nouvelle atteinte grave aux libertés fondamentales en Biélorusse. Le régime a décidé de s'attaquer aux minorités, en particulier à la minorité polonaise et lituanienne en Biélorussie. en voulant en faire un ennemi pour détourner l'attention de l'opinion publique. Les droits de la minorité polonaise en Biélorussie sont bafoués par les autorités biélorusses. Les autorités lituaniennes ont également pointé du doigt la complicité du régime dans le trafic des migrants vers la zone Schengen via la frontière lituanienne, ce qui représente un danger pour toute la zone Schengen, pour nous tous. Le 23 mai dernier, le régime a choqué l'ensemble de la communauté internationale en détournant un avion de ligne effectuant la liaison entre Athènes et Vilnius, dans le seul but d'arrêter un opposant politique, Roman Protasevich. C'est un acte de piraterie aérienne inacceptable commis au mépris de toutes les règles du droit international. Pour la première fois, nous observons une situation sans précédent. Les dirigeants de l'Union européenne se sont accordés le 21 juin sur des sanctions individuelles et des sanctions économiques à l'égard du régime biélorusse. Pour la première fois, l'Europe se montre unie sans le clivage entre l'Est et l'Ouest, Nord et Sud. Notre groupe, à plusieurs reprises, a pris une position ferme par rapport à la situation depuis les dernières élections en 2020. Nous, les Polonais, les Hongrois, Tchèques, Slovaques, Roumains, Bulgares et le peuple d'ancienne Yougoslavie, nous avons souffert par le passé de la dictature sous le régime communiste. La propagande du régime essayait toujours de détruire l'image de l'opposition en la traitant comme un ennemi et traiter et traître au sol des pays tiers, mais partout. Avec l'aide des démocraties occidentales, nous sommes parvenus à retrouver la liberté. J'ai la conviction profonde que très prochainement les Biélorusses, comme il y a 30 ans, nous tous, parviendront eux aussi à se libérer de la dictature et à installer la démocratie dans son pays. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mrs. Yufereva Skuratowska. On behalf of ALDE, you have the floor.
Honorable President, dear colleagues, there is no question about it. We have to strongly condemn the act of the Belarusian authorities in forcing a passenger plane to land on the 23rd of May and detaining Mr. Protasevich and Ms. Sapega. We cannot look past the violations of basic human rights and the use of violence, not in this case, nor in the pre-incidents we have been observing for almost a year now. Roman Protasevich was granted political asylum in Poland and therefore must be treated as a political refugee with all the protection the international law provides. We are concerned about his treatment in detention, where the use of torture by the security forces has been widely documented. In the context of protecting basic human rights, this is the right to life. I would like to remind you that as of this year, Belarus is the only country in Europe to still carry out the death penalty. This is not acceptable. In our opinion, the call on all EU-based carriers to avoid overflight of Belarus and the ban on Belarusian airlines to use the EU airspace is a necessary measure. The safety of civilian air traffic is a question of international security. All restrictions for using the airspace are justified when it comes to a country that refuses to enforce all the necessary measures to provide safety within their borders. The International Civil Aviation Organization must investigate the incident and give their judgment on the matter. President Alexander Lukashenko has been maneuvering between the European Union and Russia for 25 years now. I sincerely hope that this game will not end up with the North Korea type of country in the middle of Europe. I cannot stress this enough. The people of Belarus need to have their basic rights and freedoms protected. They cannot be persecuted, repressed, and surveilled purely because of their political convictions. At the same time, we have to stand by the Belarusian people so that they could have the possibility to make their own decisions without any influences from abroad. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Nataluka Dmitrov on behalf of EC. You have the floor.
Very much. Dear colleagues, on Sunday, 23rd May, the Ryanair flight, as you well know, traveling from Athens to Vilnius made an abrupt change of course over Belarus, some 10 kilometers from Lithuanian border, and made a forced emergency landing in Minsk because an alleged email bomb threat. Now, if one analyzes the Belarusian public communications in late May, he might discover the following version of events. So an alleged member of Palestinian movement Hamas sent an email from Switzerland to Belarus demanding that Israel ceases fire in the Gaza Strip, otherwise a Polish aircraft departing from Greece will explode over Lithuania. At the same time, the United Nations International Civic Aviation Organization, the ICAO, came out with an alternative version. The forced landing of the aircraft may have contravened a core aviation treaty, the Chicago Convention, which is part of the international order created after World War II, which might give grounds to consider the actions of Belarusian authorities as piracy. The US and the EU condemned official Minsk actions, but not only them, however. Hamas spokesman Fazil Bahroum denied his organization had any knowledge or connection to the alleged bomb threat, while another senior member of Hamas, Dr. Musa Abu Marzouk, tweeted, "The accusations of Belarusian Ministry of Transportation are baseless as well as false and absurd." Now, Belarus is officially condemned by the US, the EU, and Hamas. What a great time to be alive. A time of absolute folly that we, in a manner, unfortunately led to unleash. Ladies and gentlemen, the threat to the whole of Europe is not just the situation in Belarus. The threat to the whole of Europe is basically, unfortunately, unpunished evil. And the situation in Belarus is just its latest and vigorous example. We, the free and democratic societies of both the East and the West, have succeeded throughout history in inventing solutions for the most outstanding challenges that humanity has ever faced or produced, save for one. We mainly failed to plug the source of such challenges in a timely and duly manner. And if the evil is left unpunished, it will surely strike again. And the situation with the aircraft grounded in Minsk is a perfect demonstration. And this case does not create a threatening precedent. It is precisely the result of a threatening precedent that lacked proper reaction some time ago. A number of threatening precedents, to be precise: the invasion of Georgia, the hacking of Bundestag servers, the poisoning of Skripal family, the annexation of Crimea, and other examples that create a track record of cases initiated and tolerated by even members of this distinguished assembly. Cases that, once left unduly answered, then become the source of inspiration for rogues around the globe. Thus, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot allow ourselves to remain as mere silent observers of blatant violation of international law, international security, human rights, or hostile actions against sovereign states. Measures shall be taken, justice shall be restored, and moreover, evil shall be punished. Therefore, our group strongly supports the necessity to boldly react on behalf of the Assembly to the situation in Belarus and calls the creation of an ad hoc working group within the Council of Europe tasked with monitoring the human rights situation in Belarus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Gunnarsson on behalf of UEL.
Mr. President, it's now been exactly 1 month since the apparently illegal capture of the Ryanair plane by Belarusian authorities on what appeared to be bogus grounds. The following arrests and imprisonment of Mr. Protasevich and Mr. Vega also are in clear violation of international law and the Montreal Convention. This disregard for international law and procedures remains unresolved. By endangering the lives of the plane's passengers in order to satisfy the means of capturing a vocal opponent of the government, the authorities have set an example that this body cannot accept. An investigation into the matter is underway by the ICAO, and all relevant authorities should be urged to cooperate. In the meantime, the Belarusian authorities should immediately release the prisoners captured on the plane. We must ask ourselves whether condoning this action by inactivity will give other governments with totalitarian tendencies the go-ahead for similar actions. However, we must also ensure that the actions we do take to provide pressure on the authorities in question, that the pressure is on the authorities rather than the public that we're trying to protect. Let's not forget that passenger planes have, in the recent years, been targets in conflicts with horrendous consequences, as well as having been forced to land apparently based on the identity of some of their passengers. Apparently, the situation in Belarus remains the same as far as respect for human rights is concerned. The Council is currently looking carefully into the situation under the leadership of Mr. Kimmo Kiljunen, whose report is forthcoming. The rule of law must prevail, and full respect of human rights must always be at the forefront. The people of Belarus deserve, like every other people, basic human rights, freedom of speech, the right to assembly, and the right to free and fair election. It behooves the Belarusian authorities to ensure their people these basic rights. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Kiljunen on behalf of the Socialists.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, during its April session, our Assembly adopted 2 resolutions concerning Belarus. The resolution Human Rights Violation in Belarus gives a detailed account of the serious and repeated human rights violation committed on a massive scale following the 2020 presidential elections. Similarly, the resolution on urgent need for electoral reform in Belarus condemns in strongest terms the unprecedented wave of violence, mass arrests, intimidation and prosecution of political opponents, human rights defenders, journalists, media workers, independent election observers and citizens of Belarus following the presidential elections. Mr. President, unfortunately, since April, the situation in Belarus has not improved. It's quite the opposite. In particular, the recent diversion of forced landing of the Ryanair flight and the arrest of Roman Protasevich and Sofia Sapega is an alarming attack on the rules governing civil aviation. The fact that similar types of incidents has happened before on the European soil makes the present case all the more worrying. It's clear that one unacceptable thing doesn't make another one acceptable. What happened for the Ryanair flight is a severe threat on human security. Civil aircraft should be able to operate safely and securely. No wonder that international community has reacted swiftly and strongly. It is a concern for all of us. The Socialists, Democrats and Greens group joins its voice to that of the international community to condemn this incident. The group also demands the immediate and unconditional release of Roman Protasevich and Sofia Sapega, as well as all other journalists and political prisoners held in Belarus. The figures are alarming. There are already close to 500 political prisoners in Belarus. In any democracy, dear colleagues, the place of opposition is in the parliament, not in prison. Mr. President, having said that, I would like finally to quote our resolution on electoral reform. Quotation. The integration of Belarus to the Council of Europe on the basis of the organization values and principles remains a strategic objective. Thus, we should continue to call on the Belarusian authorities and all relevant stakeholders to urgently conduct a broad-based and inclusive national dialogue to ensure a peaceful way out of the current crisis and to open the door for necessary reforms benefiting all Belarusian citizens. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sir Tony Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd,
President,
you have the floor.
I'm also delighted to be able to take part in this short debate because it is so important. As my friend Kim Il-Kilmunian has just said, the place for opposition politicians is in the Belarusian parliament. But in fact, things go a little deeper than that because we know that the world believes that Mr. Lukashenko is not the president of Belarus. He did not win the election last August that was almost certainly won by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. But of course, it isn't just the defrauding of an electoral process that Mr. Lukashenko stands charged with. The events since then, as colleagues have already expressed, are frightening across the whole of Europe. Torture of people who are political prisoners, but people who didn't commit any great crimes. Daria Chultsova was a camera operator. She filmed a demonstration in protest about the death of a young man who himself was a protester. She was not part of that protest, and yet now is serving, along with a colleague, Sandreeva, a prison sentence for what everywhere else would be regarded as a non-crime. We know that those in prison have been subject to torture and horrendously, in the case of some of sexual violence and rape, so we're told. But the astonishing events of the de facto hijacking of the plane must leave the world mystified, partly because it was so clearly an act of terror. To fabricate the idea that there was a bomb on board would be a criminal offence of itself in many regimes, certainly in my own country. But to use that as a way of arresting one journalist and his girlfriend, Roman Protasevich, is incredible. And it's incredible for this reason, and that this not only is an event of itself that's shocking, it's also, quite frankly, threatened everybody on that plane when a MiG aircraft effectively was part of forcing the Ryanair flight to land in Minsk. And of course, at that level, potentially threatening every other passenger on board, as well as the intended victims of this crime. In that context, the world has reacted. I'm glad to see this. The EU, my own country, the United Kingdom, the United States and Canada now have begun to impose a tougher sanction regime, probably one that they should have introduced at an earlier stage. But let's be thankful for what's there. In particular, in the case of the UK, the decision to sanction BNK UK Limited, the Belarusian oil producers, is an important step forward. But Mr. President, I'll just conclude by saying this, that what took place is outrageous. The world has reacted, and we are grateful for that reaction. But Mr. Lukashenko must reckon it's time to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Protasevich. You have the floor. Okay, we might come back. We take now Mr. Rampi. Mr. Rampi, you have the floor.
Sì, signor Presidente, signori colleghi, io ho una passione, lo confesso, per la Bielorussia. Ho avuto l'onore e il piacere con alcune organizzazioni, con alcune ONG, di andare in quel meraviglioso paese diversi anni fa, prima di tutto che accadesse tutto ciò che a cui stiamo assistendo, di cui stiamo discutendo questa mattina, proprio per portare avanti una campagna per la moratoria internazionale della pena di morte e per l'abolizione della pena di morte in Bielorussia, che avrebbe permesso, così speravamo allora, di far entrare a pieno diritto la Bielorussia in questo consesso, in questa assemblea parlamentare, e di colmare quel vuoto che oggi oggettivamente rappresenta l'assenza di questo Paese in questa organizzazione che copre l'intero campo geografico dell'Europa intesa nel senso più largo possibile e che vede proprio quella carenza, quel buco, che ovviamente non è un buco di territorio, non ci mancano qua dentro delle montagne, dei laghi, dei fiumi, ci mancano milioni di persone che non sono protette dalla Corte internazionale dei diritti dell'uomo, che non sono protette dal Tribunale, che non sono protette da tutti quegli impegni e quelle discussioni che noi riusciamo a portare avanti, con fatica anche in questa Assemblea parlamentare, dove è possibile che colleghi appunto armeni, azeri, che stanno vivendo una situazione drammatica nelle loro terre, siano qui seduti insieme a discutere e quindi a far valere le parole invece delle armi, e dove succede appunto la stessa cosa per quanto riguarda tante altre questioni aperte. Penso ai rapporti tra Russia e Ucraina, eccetera. Ecco, io credo che sia davvero importante, sarebbe davvero importante poter affrontare ciò che sta succedendo in Bielorussia con la Bielorussia come membro, come parte di questo consesso. E allora quello che è successo da allora, da quella mia prima visita ad oggi, è andato esattamente nella direzione opposta di quello che auspicavamo. Il regime bielorusso, invece che, incontrare e maturare alcuni degli obiettivi che questa Assemblea parlamentare, che questo Consiglio d'Europa nel suo complesso provava a dare, ha fatto dei significativi passi indietro. Oggi ci sono oppositori politici in carcere, abbiamo sentito in quali condizioni. Ho avuto la fortuna, ma anche, la tristezza di essere in contatto con alcuni di loro, di perdere il contatto, di scrivere a loro delle lettere che spero abbiano letto, ma di cui non so nulla. Io credo che noi dobbiamo tenere alta questa bandiera, noi dobbiamo tendere la mano al popolo bielorusso e dobbiamo pretendere, con la forza dell'intelligenza e con la forza della democrazia, che la Bielorussia e i suoi cittadini possano entrare nell'alveo dei paesi democratici del Consiglio d'Europa. Grazie.
Thank you very much. We'll try again with Mr. Protasiewicz. Mr. Protasiewicz, you have the floor.
Hello? 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 Hello?
We can hear you somehow. To a limited amount. Let's try a bit later again. Then I give the floor first to Mr. Kiselyak. Mr. Kiselyak, you have the floor. That doesn't seem to work either. Then, does it? Yes. Okay, here you go. You have the floor, Mr. Kiselyak. I tried to call you yesterday, but I'm very glad that we can meet again. You have the floor.
Thank you. Спасибо, господин председатель. Дорогие коллеги, я слушаю нынешнюю дискуссию и не могу отделаться от ощущения, что сама постановка вопроса об угрозе Европы от ситуации в Беларуси и тон, который ей задают инициаторы, заставляет нашу организацию вновь втягиваться в дискуссии, знаете, эпохи постправды. Потому что все аргументы, которые я слышал до сих пор, обвиняющие режим в самых разнообразных вещах, построены на либо искажении, либо на полной отсутствии объяснений причин того, что и как на самом деле развивается ситуация в Беларуси. А ситуация такова, что извне политическую ситуацию в стране пытаются раскачать с путем поддержки оппозиции, которая гастролирует сейчас по европейским позициям, с помощью подготовки профессиональных революционеров, которые отправляют в Белоруссию. Причем делается это в странах, которые сегодня в дискуссии представлены, пожалуй, с наибольшим пафосом. Я, например, приведу пример Украины, где один из командиров так называемых добровольческих батальонов прямо говорит, что они обменивались опытами с белорусами, которые отправлялись работать в свою страну. Весь пафос вокруг самолета, который сел в Минске, тоже не искренен и не до конца честен. Во-первых, до того, как были проведены какие-либо расследования по линии ИКАО, уже вердикт виновности был вынесен, уже санкции вводятся, потому что ясная заряженность на раскачку извне ситуации в стране. Причем, опять же, кто наиболее активен в этом вопросе? Я хочу напомнить, что в 2013 году Австрия посадила самолет президента Боливии без всяких на то оснований по политическим причинам. А в 2016 году наши украинские коллеги, которые сегодня тоже по этому вопросу весьма пафосные, посадили белорусский самолет с антимайдановским активистом на борту, которого самолет посадили под угрозом военной силы. И этого человека сняли с борта. Кстати, в Дублине 30 мая этого года по таким же причинам был посажен самолет той же Ryanair, и что-то я не слышал ни одного возгласа сомнения относительно того, насколько это правомерно. И более того, в стране готовился переворот. Хоть кто-нибудь с убийством президента, хоть кто-нибудь сегодня об этом говорил. Поэтому давайте быть честными. Нам надо обеспечить способность белорусов работать самим над своими проблемами, развивать собственный диалог, что, кстати, уже развивается в рамках конституционной дискуссии в стране, о которой сегодня тоже почему-то никто вспоминать не хочет. Поэтому я призываю всех быть честными.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kiselyak. Thank you. Next speaker is Ms. Kravchuk. You have the floor.
Distinguished Assembly members, Belarus has always been a hard negotiator for the Council of Europe and its Parliamentary Assembly. After Mr. Lukashenko had refused to abolish the death penalty in the late 1990s, the dialogue between the Assembly and the official Minsk was frozen, in fact. The recent accident in May 2021 was the logical development of no reaction of the democratic West to the anti-presidential protests, which have been ongoing since summer of 2020. Because of the censorship, which covers even online media in Belarus, the oppositioners and citizens of Belarus did not convey the message of the scale of the protests, which were severely oppressed. After the hijacking the Ryanair plane and the expelling of the Latvian ambassador from Minsk, it looks like that the passive phase of Europe's disagreement of the last Europe's dictator's policy has to turn into the active phase. 1,084 kilometers of Ukraine's northern land state border is the border with Belarus. We have lots of common in the past. At the level of the parliament, the bilateral Ukrainian-Belarusian Assembly has been functioning for several convocations. But since 2009, the Assembly hasn't been functioning. And unfortunately, I do not see any political common lines between Ukraine and Belarus in the future unless Belarus conducts the democratic elections. As for now, the officials of our neighboring country do not share the principles of democracy, protection of human rights, and the rule of law. In conclusion, I suggest to the Assembly colleagues to come up with the ad hoc monitoring procedure for Belarus aimed to democratization of the country. And let's hope for the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Unfortunately, we have arrived to our last speaker, and that is Mr. Samad Saidov. Mr. Saidov, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Dear friends, dear colleagues, I remember that in this organization, at the political committee, we discussed the relationship between the opposition and the authorities of Belarus. At that time, we were close to achieving a breakthrough in relations with Belarus. And Council of Europe, and especially its Parliamentary Assembly, has really fulfilling its historic mission, the mission of uniting countries and people, different opinions and positions. Unfortunately, radical approaches prevailed, and those who believed that pressure and sanctions to the country were more productive won. I know, and we know very well, what this led to. This led to a complete rupture of all relations with Belarus. And now, today, these relations are actually in the state of war. Economic, ideological, cultural, civilizational. But our organization has been created not for waging war. It was creating for peace. And I believe that it's necessary in any case, I know that it's very difficult, to preserve bridges for cooperation and dialogue. Yes, it's hard, but it has to be done. We must prevent this real war with Belarus. We must go through negotiations. This is what I call on the Council of Europe. Find the courage, strength and wisdom and start these negotiations. Go to Belarus. See what is happening there from the inside. Not listen to those who want the war. Talk with those who live inside the country. This is the best way to prevent distractions and tragedy. I am sure that there are very many people here and they are ready to go to Minsk. All that is needed is your decision and will. The Council of Europe is the oldest and widest organization, and I am sure this organization does not the arrogance that we can see sometimes from other international organizations. And therefore, it is we who must keep distance from rash decisions which will bring grief and tragedy not only for Belarus, but for the whole Europe. And that's why, dear friends and colleagues, again, we should think how can we refrain our dialogue, despite of difficulties, despite of a lot of problems which Belarus has. We should do that because this is the value of our organization. Dialogue and again dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, I must now interrupt the list of speakers in order to start sharp our panel at 11 o'clock. And I would like to ask you to stay in the hemicycle. The speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present physically or remotely during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report, provided that speakers connected remotely can report their actual presence when the debate is closed. I remind colleagues that typewritten texts must be submitted electronically no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. I remind you that at the end of current affairs debate, the Assembly is not asked to decide upon a text, but the matter may and actually will be referred by the Bureau to the responsible committee for a report. Thank you very much for your attention.
We Can I? Qu'il arrive, on laisse. Please take your seats, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, I am a very severe chair of the Parliamentary Assembly. Of course, not as much as Maria, who is heading our institution. Video, please. Mesdames et messieurs, je vous souhaite toutes et tous la bienvenue à Strasbourg ou depuis Strasbourg, le siège du Conseil de l'Europe et de son Assemblée parlementaire et le centre des droits humains et des libertés fondamentales en Europe, où nous avons évidemment notre Convention européenne des droits humains, où il y a plus de 200 conventions, parmi la Convention d'Istanbul, qui a comme but d'éradiquer la violence à l'égard des femmes. I'm very pleased to start with a message by Madam Nadia Murad, who is a human rights activist, laureate of the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize, recipient of the 2016 Václav Havel Human Rights Prize and the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought. Nadia Murad is a leading advocate for survivors of genocide and of sexual violence. Through Nadia's initiative, she advocates for resources and policy changes to protect and support survivors of sexual violence and rebuild communities in crisis. As a member of France's Gender Advisory Council, je salue la présence de Madame la Ministre, Nadia advocates with G7 member states to adopt legislation to protect and promote women's rights at UN level. Nadia and the Nadia's initiative team were instrumental in drafting and advocating for the passage of UN Security Council Resolution 2467, which expands the UN's commitment to end sexual violence in conflict. Please know that the Istanbul Convention, who is fighting against violence against women, applies not only in situations of armed conflict, but also in times of peace. Madame Murad, we are very pleased to have you on board. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, President Dames, parliamentarians, friends, greetings. For every setback our societies face, women are forced 10 steps back. The COVID-19 pandemic has increased the risk of exploitation and brutality against women worldwide. Since the pandemic began, Numerous countries have seen drastic increases in reports of domestic violence. The few resources designated for prevention, rescue, and rehabilitation are being stretched thin. As a result, women's health and safety are on the line. It is now difficult for many women to access psychological support, healthcare, and safe shelter. For communities affected by conflict and displacement, these effects are often compounded. At a time when we should be fortifying women's rights, it is concerning to see support for the Istanbul Convention moving in the opposite direction. Now is not the time to back down. It is time to step up and prioritize the safety and well-being of women everywhere. I have experienced firsthand the consequences of weakening international human rights protections. The promises of never again and the responsibility to protect were forgotten when the world watched ISIS commit genocide against my people, the Yazidis of Iraq. As a result, sexual violence was used as a weapon of war. This violence was undeniably gendered. The abuse of women was used as an attempt to destroy our community from within. Sadly, the international community is still falling short in providing comprehensive support to survivors and rescuing the 2,800 Yazidi women and children who remain in ISIS captivity. The Istanbul Convention has the potential to make meaningful change for survivors like the Yazidis and women around the world by shifting the international norms around gender-based violence. The Convention has already helped identify ways to shift from a reactive to a proactive approach. For example, economic empowerment allows survivors to reclaim their livelihoods and positions women to be less susceptible to exploitation. Collecting data on gender-based violence provides a clear picture of the immediate need for services, as well as an understanding of the patterns of abuse. Accountability for sexual violence can facilitate healing and justice for survivors, and also prevent future crimes by sending a clear message that perpetrators will not receive impunity. The Council of Europe brought global attention on the issue of gender-based violence by passing the Istanbul Convention. You cannot now look away from what you correctly identified as one of the most dangerous and pervasive human rights violations. The gravity of this issue demands that it be addressed at every level in international bodies such as this, in your national governments, and in our communities. One solution will not work for everyone. Throughout the world, different socioeconomic and political circumstances impact women's rights and require different solutions. Compounding factors such as race, religion, class, and access to healthcare, education, and empowerment pose unique hurdles. That is why it is so critical that local communities, and especially survivors, be empowered with the tools and resources to lead preventative and responsive measures that are adapted to their specific needs. In closing, I ask you to consider this. Preventing gender-based violence does not deplete a community. It strengthens it and provides a foundation for success. This success starts with gender equality, one that includes the support and participation of men and boys. In order to prevent sexual violence in times of war, we must create a strong foundation of gender equality in times of peace. It is our duty as global citizens to collectively ensure the human rights of women and girls. Their safety, their respect, and their humanity depend on all of us. We cannot let them down. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Murad, for this very important message. We will now head into our panel, but I would like to first recall each and every one of us that during these 2 hours that we are together, there will be thousands of women who will be beaten. There's a lot of violence against women at this very instant as we sit here. Even women will be beaten to death as we sit here. Just think about it. We're talking not just some cases, we're talking about thousands of incidents at this instance. And unfortunately, during the 2 hours that we speak, that we have an exchange of views, there will be women beaten to death. Just think about it. This is why this is so important that we do this, not to celebrate a convention, but Madam Secretary General, to take stock and to see how we can step up our action to eradicate violence against women. Think about it. We will head off with our panel. Just a few rules, ladies and gentlemen. Since we will have an exchange of views, our members of parliament will have full access to have a 1-minute message, question to the panel. Our colleagues of the panel will have, as an introduction, 5 minutes. I hope that I will not exaggerate by asking each and every one of the panel to stick to the timing, more or less. But I do think that this is important in order to have each and every one express its views. We respect each other's views. The convention is not an obligatory convention, but it is a convention of which we think that everyone should be in there, because it is a tool, it is a golden standard. There are elements in there that will indeed help each and every one of us to fight violence against women. We will start off with our panel. J'ai à présent le plaisir et l'honneur de présenter M. Alexandre De Croo, Premier ministre de Belgique, mon Premier ministre. M. De Croo est l'auteur d'un livre intitulé « Le siècle de la femme », c'est un homme qui l'a écrit, dans lequel il livre un vibrant plaidoyer pour l'égalité totale entre les hommes et les femmes. Il y a également un chapitre entièrement dédié à la violence envers les femmes qui, selon le Premier ministre, est comparable à une pandémie, voire même pire qu'une pandémie. M. De Croo allie la théorie à la pratique et à l'action concrète puisqu'il est à la tête du premier gouvernement fédéral paritaire en Belgique, avec 20 membres du gouvernement, dont 10 femmes et 10 hommes. Il est également l'un des premiers soutiens du mouvement She Decides, qui promeut l'avancée des droits des femmes au niveau mondial et se définit lui-même comme un féministe et fier de l'être. Monsieur le Premier ministre, vous avez la parole. You have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, cher Rick, et merci pour la très gentille introduction. You mentioned my book, which also exists in English, which is called The Age of Women, Why Feminism is Good for Men. And one of the chapters is indeed about the fact that gender-based violence is a pandemic. We by now know very well, all of us, what a pandemic is. But that pandemic has been going on for decades. And the impact of the gender-based violence pandemic has been much harsher than anything we've seen related to COVID. And we've unfortunately also seen that the two pandemics add one to another, because in periods of crisis, it is always women and girls who are disproportionately impacted by something that happens. That is the case with civil war. That is unfortunately also the case with this COVID pandemic. What this is about, what this discussion is about, is that every woman and every girl knows what their rights are and knows how to enforce them and knows that they can count on people to enforce their rights. Now, the facts, and Mr. President, you mentioned them, the facts are appalling. 1 out of 5 women is still victim of physical or sexual violence. Every day, 7 women die under the beating of their partners. Since the start of the pandemic, unfortunately, the emergency calls for these dramatic topics have increased even more so. This has nothing to do with ideology. This is not an ideological topic. These are just the facts. And this is not sustainable. It's not sustainable because from a human perspective, it's unacceptable. It's against the humanity that we are, but it's also hampering the full development of our humanity. How would we have a world where we would agree that for half of the population, they should never get the opportunity to fully develop all the potential that they have? I think that at this moment, more than ever, the Istanbul Convention can help us to reverse this negative trend. And the Istanbul Convention is a success story. Today, 34 states have ratified the Istanbul Convention. Those states have been working extensively to implement the convention at the national level. The essential added value of this convention is that violence against women and domestic violence can no longer be left unpunished in the domestic sphere. Governments and state parties have the obligation to implement zero-tolerance policy against any form of violence. And I think we can be proud of that success. But at 10 years old, the Istanbul Convention is also at a crossroad. And one of its first state parties decided to withdraw from the convention. And I must say that I deeply regret that. What type of message are you giving to women and girls around the world at a time where a health crisis is unfortunately increased domestic violence? So what we need is a step up to prevent gender-based violence, to protect survivors, to prevent that things like this could happen. And Belgium is determined to join the Secretary General of the Council of Europe and so many others, including civil society, in order to promote the convention louder and clear, and to lead by example by implementing it in the best possible way. Promotion and protection of women's rights is a Belgian priority, both in our domestic and in our foreign policy. Belgium is currently developing a 6th national action plan for the elimination of gender-based violence. We have also adopted additional measures in the framework of the COVID-19 crisis. So, to conclude, I want to say Belgium stands ready to share its experience. Share its experience, first of all, in the ratification and the implementation of the convention, And secondly, in the development and implementation of national action plans against gender-based violence. The Belgian Institute for Equality of Women and Men regularly engaged in technical exchanges with experts at the technical level. So today, once again, I would like to invite other member states, members of the Council of Europe and beyond, to join our commitment to eliminate violence against women and girls by ratifying this convention. I hope that today's event will contribute to the understanding of how crucial this is in the development of our societies. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. We now move to Madam Anca Dana Dragu, who is the President of the Senate of Romania. She's the first woman in history of Romania to hold this important post, being elected in December of last year. She has served previously as a Minister of Public Finance, Logics. She holds a PhD in economy. Now, Romania signed the Istanbul Convention in 2014 and ratified it 2 years later, but it was a process that had some challenges. So we look forward to hearing from Madam Dragu on progress with the implementation of the Istanbul Convention, but more specifically, colleague, Madam Speaker, of the process and the role of the Parliament, the role of members of Parliament, of how to succeed to ratify and put into practice the Istanbul Convention. We're very happy to have you on board. Madam Speaker, you have the floor, 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, and I'm delighted to be here with you today, celebrating 10 years, but as you also mentioned, it's maybe not a celebration, or it's the time of reflection, and we are at a crossroads. It's the moment we need to push for the implementation of Istanbul Convention. Unfortunately, violence against women continues to be the most common violation of fundamental human rights worldwide. And there are serious consequences for individuals and for families, for society, with huge social and economic costs. We know that during the pandemic, violence against women increased, and that there are more vulnerabilities that have been developed during this period of time. As you said, Romania signed the convention in 2014 and ratified it 2 years later in 2016. This was the beginning of a very complex process in which the legislation was revised, and public policies were adapted to this convention. Also budgeted new partnerships. Partnership was created with the civil society, which has a fundamental role in this this phenomenon to diminish the violence against the women. In terms of legislative developments, let me mention, for instance, the introduction of the Provisional Protection Order, the specific legal provisions on cyber violence, and the offender electronic monitoring digital system to be used in judicial and criminal procedures, which has entered into force just last month. Of course, besides all the positive developments, much still remains to be done and new challenges must be addressed. Fighting violence against women should be a continuous joint effort involving all national actors and enhanced by international cooperation. This is also my priority as President of the Senate, also as the first woman ever elected in this office. From the very beginning of my mandate, I have initiated in-depth public debates on women's empowerment and participation in decision-making process, including the introduction of electoral gender quotas, which follows the zipper principle, and on ways to eradicate all forms of gender-based violence and promote equal opportunities for men and women. While taking a zero-tolerance approach against women, I'm committed to encourage an open dialogue between all state institutions with responsibilities in this field. the civil society, international organizations, and to open new channels of interparliamentary cooperation at bilateral and multilateral levels. Let me take this opportunity to commend the Council of Europe for its remarkable work in relation to violence against women, to diminish and to eradicate this phenomenon, and domestic violence. At the same time, I want to congratulate the Parliamentary Assembly, whose recommendations, tools, and guidance have helped parliaments since many years now already. Ladies and gentlemen, Romania is committed to continue to implement the provisions of the Istanbul Convention and encourages its signing and ratification by as many states as possible. So the remaining states should join the club. This is a truly unique instrument. And if we were asked to sum up in 2 words why, I would say that the Istanbul Convention saves lives. Saves lives of women, and ensure the future of the children. Our responsibility as parliamentarians is to integrate it in a comprehensive cross-sector national response to gender-based violence, including as part of the COVID-19 recovery process. We should be all unite to ensure that the Istanbul Convention will not only be words, but will turn into tangible actions with indicators, policy indicators, outcome indicators, and specifically budget lines in our budgets. We should all unite to eradicate this phenomenon and enable each and every woman to live safe from fear, safe from violence. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Maintenant, je me tourne vers Madame la Ministre. Madame Elisabeth Moreno, ministre déléguée auprès du Premier ministre chargée de l'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes, de la diversité et de l'égalité des chances. Vos responsabilités, Madame, couvrent la coordination du travail gouvernemental en matière de parité et d'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes, de la lutte contre la discrimination et contre la haine envers les personnes lesbiennes, gays et trans. L'une de vos priorités est notamment d'approfondir l'action conduite en matière de violence envers les femmes, en veillant à l'exécution rigoureuse de l'ensemble des 46, pas moins de 46 mesures issues du Grenelle des violences conjugales de 2019 visant à lutter contre toutes les formes de violence à l'égard des femmes. Il est logique que ma question portera donc principalement sur comment mettre la Convention en pratique, à la fois d'un point de vue législatif, mais surtout du point de vue d'action concrète. À travers votre présence, en plus, je souhaite également saluer l'engagement de la France envers les questions d'égalité hommes-femmes et la promotion de la Convention d'Istanbul au niveau international, grâce au Forum Génération Égalité qui se tiendra la semaine prochaine à Paris, auquel notre secrétaire général et moi-même aurons le plaisir d'assister, et la coalition d'action sur la violence de genre où l'Assemblée parlementaire fait partie. Madame la Ministre, avec beaucoup de plaisir et d'honneur, je vous donne la parole.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Sachez que le plaisir et l'honneur sont partagés. Madame la Secrétaire générale, Monsieur le Premier ministre, Madame la Présidente du Sénat, Mesdames et Messieurs les parlementaires, il y a 10 ans, le traité le plus ambitieux visant à prévenir et lutter contre les violences à l'égard des femmes et la violence domestique était ouvert à signature. La France, mais aussi la Turquie, la Slovaquie et 10 autres États étaient parmi ces tout premiers signataires et je suis bien sûr très honorée d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui pour échanger sur ce sujet essentiel. Depuis 10 ans, la Convention d'Istanbul permet de sauver des vies. Vous l'avez dit, Madame la sénatrice. Oui, il y a en France plusieurs mesures inédites qui ont été prises, notamment depuis 2017, pour lutter contre les violences faites aux femmes et renforcer l'égalité femmes-hommes, érigée en grande cause du quinquennat par le président de la République, Emmanuel Macron. Et parallèlement À la visite en France du groupe d'experts sur la lutte contre la violence à l'égard des femmes et la violence domestique, en fin 2019, une stratégie nationale, appelée Grenelle des violences conjugales, a été décidée avec l'ensemble du gouvernement et les services de l'État, mais aussi les acteurs associatifs. Elle a abouti à la formulation de 46 mesures, dont certaines font directement écho aux engagements pris à la signature de la Convention d'Istanbul. Et j'aimerais mentionner quelques-unes de ces mesures. Premièrement, la ligne d'information, d'écoute et d'accompagnement, le 3919, pour les femmes victimes de violences, est désormais ouverte 7 jours sur 7, 24 heures sur 24, conformément au rapport d'évaluation de référence du Grévaux. Deuxièmement, pour faciliter la prise de plainte, nous avons formé plus de 90 000 policiers et gendarmes aux questions des violences intrafamiliales et déployé une grille d'évaluation du danger dans les services de police et de gendarmerie. Ces formations spécifiques à l'intention des services répressifs répondent à l'article 15 de la Convention. Et troisièmement, afin de mettre à l'abri les victimes et les familles, le gouvernement a augmenté de 60% le nombre de places d'hébergement dédiées aux femmes victimes de violences depuis 2017, ce qui nous rapproche du standard exigeant fixé par le rapport explicatif de la Convention. Et enfin, le bracelet anti-rapprochement, pour permettre de géolocaliser le conjoint violent, a été généralisé dans tout le pays. Et pour chacune de ces mesures, nous avons pu nous appuyer sur ce que dit la Convention d'Istanbul et sur ce que nous enseignent les rapports d'évaluation du Grévio et les recommandations du comité des parties. Et nous avons sauvé des vies. Mais le fléau de la violence à l'égard des femmes et de la violence domestique n'épargne aucun pays, même ceux dont les meilleures lois ont été mises en œuvre. Il cause au niveau mondial plus de 90 000 morts par an, soit davantage que les conflits armés. Depuis la présidence française du comité des ministres du Conseil de l'Europe en 2019, la France a fait de l'universalisation de la Convention d'Istanbul un des objectifs majeurs de sa diplomatie féministe, afin que tout État qui le souhaite puisse rehausser ses standards de protection en s'appuyant sur ce texte. Nous appelons de nos vœux l'achèvement des processus de ratification en Europe, en particulier grâce à la mobilisation de vous tous, parlementaires du continent européen, prêts à former la génération égalité. Regarder le chemin parcouru en Europe ces 10 dernières années n'est pas suffisant. Le moment est venu de prendre des engagements ambitieux, concrets et mesurables pour que le droit à une vie libre de violence devienne une réalité pour les prochaines générations de femmes et de filles du monde entier. C'est ce que nous nous attacherons à faire lors du Forum Génération Égalité qui se tiendra à Paris la semaine prochaine et auquel nous aurons la joie de vous recevoir. Le format novateur du Forum Génération Égalité le distinguera des rassemblements féministes qui l'ont précédé. En effet, il réunira non seulement des chefs d'État et de gouvernement, des organisations internationales, mais également tous les autres acteurs du changement, y compris la société civile, le secteur privé et sans oublier votre Assemblée de parlementaires. Tous ces acteurs devront prendre des engagements, qu'ils soient financiers, programmatiques ou législatifs, dans l'une des 6 coalitions d'action thématiques sur des thèmes prioritaires, notamment les violences basées sur le genre, l'autonomie corporelle, les droits et la santé sexuelle, ou encore la justice et les droits économiques. Et je me réjouis, cher Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée parlementaire, que vous portiez la voix de l'Assemblée parlementaire du Conseil de l'Europe au Forum Génération Égalité, le jour même où le retrait de la Turquie de la Convention sera effectif. En faisant de l'universalisation de la Convention d'Istanbul un engagement fort de la coalition d'action sur la violence basée sur le genre, vous enverrez un message fort à la communauté internationale et je veux vous en remercier. Car ce sont bien les inégalités de genre et les idées reçues sur les rôles que devraient jouer les hommes dans la société qui sous-tendent la violence à l'égard des femmes. Partout, les stéréotypes de genre participent à dresser un chemin de vie différent pour les filles et les garçons. Les filières d'études et le monde du travail sont ségrégés. Les inégalités de salaire et de pension persistent. Les femmes sont encore sous-représentées dans les positions de leadership, en entreprise ou encore dans la vie politique. C'est d'ailleurs, je crois, l'objet de l'excellent rapport parlementaire de Madame Germany dont vous débattrez cet après-midi. Mesdames et messieurs les parlementaires, vous pouvez toutes et tous jouer un rôle crucial dans la ratification de la Convention d'Istanbul, dans sa mise en œuvre et plus généralement comme agent du changement des mentalités. Je sais que les débats dans plusieurs pays sur la Convention d'Istanbul ou même sur le concept même de genre ont pu être faussés par des malentendus et des contre-vérités. Ne vous y trompez pas et engagez-vous. Engagez-vous clairement, quelle que soit votre affiliation politique, votre religion ou votre sexe, en faveur de cette Convention d'Istanbul. Il s'agit purement et simplement de sauver la vie des femmes et des filles victimes de violences dans leur foyer. Et aucun autre instrument international ne protège mieux les femmes dans le monde. C'est notre responsabilité à toutes et à tous. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Madame la Ministre. Now we come to Madame Dubravka Simonovic. Madame Simonovic is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences. Madame Simonovic knows very well the Istanbul Convention. She was the co-chair of the ad hoc committee CAIVIO, c'est comme ça que ça s'appelait, which was the committee that prepared the convention. So is, to a certain extent, Madame Simonovic is a co-author of it. The United Nations recognizes the Istanbul Convention by far as the most advanced international legal instrument, which together with the UN's Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and other regional treaties, provide us with a solid global human rights legal framework to strategically and effectively address all forms of violence against women. Madam Simonovic, I would be very grateful if you, being one of the drafters of the Istanbul Convention, could focus a little bit on how the convention started, and specifically, as was mentioned by the Minister, how to tackle some of the issues surrounding the convention today: gender, politics, traditional values. Madam Simonovic, you have the floor. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President of the Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you for this invitation to participate in this important commemoration of 10th anniversary of the Istanbul Convention as United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences. This is a particularly important discussion for me. First, as United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, I am using the Istanbul Convention as a part of international human rights framework to address measures needed to combat and prevent violence against women, since I'm entrusted by United Nations Human Rights Council to use international human rights framework. And Istanbul Convention is now an integral part of international human rights framework focused on elimination and preventing violence against women and domestic violence. Second, as you have mentioned, I was very fortunate to participate in the elaboration of the Istanbul Convention as a co-chair of ad hoc committee, the CAIVIO committee that elaborated the convention from 2008 to 2010. And at that time, I was also CEDAW committee expert. But before that, I was also president of the Council of Europe Task Force on domestic violence against women that led very important campaign against violence against women from 2006 to 2008, and was entrusted to propose measures at the level of the Council of Europe to combat and prevent violence against women. This task force, in its final report, recommended elaboration of the Convention on Elimination of Violence Against Women. At the same time, the Ministers of Justice proposed elaboration of the Convention on Domestic Violence, and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe proposed the elaboration of the Convention on Gender-Based Violence. So the Committee of Ministers decided to establish ad hoc drafting committee that was entrusted also to decide on the scope of this convention. And we have spent 2 sessions of this committee to decide that the scope would cover violence against women and domestic violence. So this convention, from that moment, from moment of its adoption and its opening for ratification in 2011, is growing up, not only by number of ratifications, currently 34, but also as a powerful roadmap on legal and other measures needed in areas of prevention of violence against women, protection of victims, prosecution of perpetrators, and coordination of all those measures. And this could be used by all states all over the world. I'm, as a UN Special Rapporteur, using the Istanbul Convention as an important human rights instrument with respect to Council of Europe member states. Since 2015, I have been UN Special Rapporteur, and I have visited during my past 6 years 11 countries and elaborated 11 thematic reports. And from those country visits and thematic reports, I could verify very huge gaps between international norms in the Istanbul Convention and UN conventions, mainly CEDAW Convention, and national laws and their implementation. So, for example, I have visited Georgia before the ratification of Istanbul Convention by Georgia. That was on the way, and I have recommended its ratification. That was done after that. But I have also visited Bulgaria that did not yet ratify the Istanbul Convention, and I have recommended its ratification. So I have very concrete proposal and measures that should be addressed by the government. And I would like to recommend to all Council of Europe member states to ratify the Istanbul Convention, including European Union. But I'm also recommending to all states all over the world to use its provisions as a model provisions for elaboration of national laws and this roadmap for implementation of the UN 7 and Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Because there are many synergies, there are many definitions are the same. UN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women is defining violence against women as a gender-based violence against women. The same goes for CEDAW General Recommendation number 19. And let me mention that I have prepared a framework model legislation for rape, and my next report is addressing rape as a human rights violation. It will be presented to Human Rights Council on 28 June, because currently there is a widespread impunity for perpetrators of rape and lack of justice for victims. Currently, we can observe culture of rape, this culture of impunity for perpetrators and stigmatization of victims that are not reporting rape, lack of data, high attrition rates, and lack of harmonization of criminal laws, also for the Council of Europe member states with respect to Istanbul Convention. So I would like to say that now those provisions of the Istanbul Convention that are addressing rape, criminalization and prosecution of rape are very important standards that are reflected in my report on rape, and my report could be now also used as a tool to implement the Istanbul Convention. And just briefly, with respect to pushbacks against women's rights and gender equality, they are not only against the Istanbul Convention. In different parts of the world, we are seeing the similar, same arguments against gender equality, against the term gender, and so on. And the way forward is to use independent human rights mechanisms like Gravio, that is observing the Istanbul Convention, my mandate, CEDAW, and other 7 of us at our platform. As UN Secretary General, called all of us to push back those pushback movements, and independent mechanisms are here to help with these pushbacks with respect to pushbacks, but we should be better supported. And the Istanbul Convention should be widely promoted and should be used by all humanity. It should be globalized. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now turn to our own Secretary General of the Council of Europe, who is the beholder and the guardian of all Council of Europe conventions, amongst them, obviously, the Istanbul Convention. Madam Secretary General, we all know your deep commitment towards this promotion of the Istanbul Convention, but what is perhaps a little bit less known is that when you were Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Croatia, You had to tackle the debates in your country about possible misunderstandings around the convention and beliefs that the domestic legal order was sufficient to tackle the scourge of violence against women and girls. So, Madam Secretary General, we would like to hear from you as to what the Convention represents for upholding women's rights, why is it a golden standard, promoting gender equality, ending violence against women, and what is the added value of the Convention as to this effect. Madam Secretary General, I'm very pleased to give you the floor. 5 minutes, please.
Mr. President of the Parliamentary Assembly, Prime Minister De Croo, Madam President Dagu, Minister Moreno, Mrs. Shimonovich, Mrs. Moore, distinguished members. It's a pleasure to address you on a subject that is close to your hearts and to mine. We share a commitment to end violence against women and domestic violence, and an understanding that the Istanbul Convention is central to that task. The Assembly has played a key role in making the case for the treaty, and you have stood behind it foursquare over the course of the past decade. So as we mark the treaty's 10th anniversary, its success to date owes much to you. Ratified by 34 of our member states, with non-member states asking to join the United Nations, is right to describe it as gold standard. Its aims are simple and clear: to prevent violence against women, to protect those who become victims, and to ensure the prosecution of perpetrators. All the evidence suggests that where the Istanbul Convention is in force, it has brought about positive change. Our monitoring body, Grevio, has so far issued evaluation reports on 17 countries that are treaty members. These are an invaluable source of the European Court of Human Rights in adjudicating cases. And they show that each and every country evaluated has moved to amend its domestic laws so that these align with the treaty. From these reports, other important trends emerge. Movement by governments towards a consent-based definition of rape, the classification of stalking as a specific criminal offense, and the introduction of sexual harassment offenses ranging from intimidation online to the non-consensual sharing of sexual images, often known as revenge porn, and which has taken a terrible toll on many women and girls. Grevio has found improvements to the way such offenses are handled by law enforcement, prosecution services, and the judiciary. The expansion of police units specializing in sexual and domestic violence is a case in point. The European Women's Lobby has also done a lot to support the Istanbul Convention and report on its implementation. And in every area it has examined, policy, protection, prevention, and prosecution, it has found that most countries that have ratified the treaty have made change for the better. C'est tellement important. Aucune femme ne devrait craindre pour sa sécurité. Et pourtant, elles sont encore trop nombreuses dans ce cas. Nous avons tous lu ou entendu des témoignages de leur souffrance. Nous connaissons tous des femmes victimes de violences, des amis, des collègues, des membres de notre famille qui ont parfois suffisamment confiance pour nous demander de l'aide, mais qui souffrent parfois en silence. Et la récente flambée de violence pendant les confinements dus à la Covid-19 nous apprend combien les avancées que nous avons faites sont fragiles. C'est pourquoi nous devons aller de l'avant. Oui, des idées préconçues et fausses circulent sur l'objectif qui avait présidé
à l'élaboration de la Convention d'Istanbul. Et c'est sur la base de ces idées fausses qu'un de nos États membres s'est retiré de cette Convention. Notre meilleure réponse à ces fausses vérités est d'élargir le cercle des États parties à ce traité. Nous avons déjà commencé. Jeudi dernier, j'ai reçu instrument de ratification du Liechtenstein et je m'en réjouis. D'autres États membres, tels que l'Ukraine et le Royaume-Uni, progressent aussi vers une ratification. Dans ces pays et dans tous les pays, le soutien de parlementaires est crucial. Mais pour persuader d'autres pays de leur emboîter le pas, nous devons saisir toutes les occasions de faire valoir un discours ouvert, honnête et positif autour de la Convention d'Istanbul. Un discours qui est compris par les plus hautes autorités judiciaires, par la Cour constitutionnelle lettonne, par exemple, qui a relevé au début de ce mois que la portée de la Convention d'Istanbul se limite uniquement à l'élimination de la violence à l'égard des femmes et de la violence domestique. Nous devons être clairs sur qu'apporte ce traité multilatéral et qu'aucun gouvernement, à lui seul, ne saurait recréer. Il ne s'agit pas seulement d'élever le niveau des normes nationales. Il s'agit aussi de disposer d'un mécanisme de suivi international unique en son genre, indépendant et qui contribue à amener des changements difficiles, certes, mais positifs, et à instaurer la coopération entre pays afin que leurs autorités s'attellent ensemble à traduire en justice ceux qui ont choisi de commettre des crimes à l'encontre des femmes. Sur ce point, le Conseil de l'Europe est à l'avant-garde. Rien ne nous fera reculer. Au contraire, cette organisation tout entière, chacune de ses composantes, rassemblera ses forces et progressera encore, dans l'intérêt des femmes dans toute l'Europe et au-delà. Merci pour votre engagement et votre soutien.
I wish to thank all of our five panelists for their first remarks. We will come back to you while we have some exchange of views with our members of parliament. I will try to be fair and to direct some of the issues to each and every one of you. Sometimes you might be a little bit surprised, but hey, this is a hemicycle, so you're in the parliament, so you know that you can be a little bit surprised. So, Madam Speaker, Mr. Prime Minister, Madame la Ministre, Madam Secretary General, Madam General Rapporteur, I do recall very briefly a couple of elements before going to the representatives of the political groups. Men should be on board, zero tolerance, budget should be there. You have to have the means to do something, you have to be engaged. There's no misinterpretations possible, they can only be abuse, if you can say it like that. Pushback against equality of men and women is in the room, not in this one, but it is in the room. The Istanbul Convention has made changes for the better, that is very clear. This is only an intermediary phase. It's 10 years, but this is like a step up that we are looking for. More countries than we thought are coming on board, and I believe that even during this session we will get some news concerning that. And one of the things that are very important is that this is one of the sole conventions, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, where the parliaments are fully involved. This is why I now turn to the representatives of the political groups. We will have 2 minutes by each representative of a political group. Please stick to the 2 minutes. I will start with the representative of the Socialists, Madame Selin Saik-Böke. Selin, you have the floor. By video. I hope you are there.
I salute everybody on behalf of the Socialists, Democrats, and Greens group. Ownership and agency of change, solidarity, truth, resources, these four key concepts will build the future of our rights. Ownership and agency of change. Now, the Istanbul Convention was born out of centuries-long political and social struggle of women for their rights. It was hard-won. It was not granted by the grace of any political power or individuals. Its powerful roots lie in this history. Its powerful roots lie in this very organization and throughout our geography. It's not a foreign imposition, it's all of ours. We did it. Now, this panel, I think, is proof of a strong political ownership. But what's more critical is ownership by millions of gender equality fighters who are the actual change agents. Hundreds of thousands of women continue to rally throughout Europe, calling for high-level authorities to effectively implement the Istanbul Convention, not withdraw from it. And here I salute you on behalf of the millions of women of Turkey with whom I stand shoulder to shoulder and I'm proud to represent, who continue to hold on to the Istanbul Convention despite the unlawful presidential decision to withdraw from the convention, despite all political oppression. And this is where solidarity comes in. The survival of the convention is possible by solidarity of all people who believe in democracy and human rights. We need to stand strong against unlawful attempts of withdrawals and in support of those ratifying the convention. And truth. It falls on all of us to nurture truth, to tirelessly speak of facts. We have to ensure the safety of millions don't fall victim to the destructiveness of the post-truth era, misinformation built mostly by misogynist interest groups and populist politicians who surrender to them, and resources. We need sufficient funds for strong social public investment plans, for adequate number of shelters, free helplines, among others. We will not give up on our lives and our rights, and let's not give up on each other. Istanbul Convention saves lives.
Thank you. We now move to Ria Oomen on behalf of the EPP group. I think Ria is in the room. Ria, you have the floor. 2 minutes, please.
First of all, I would like to thank all the panelists for their moving statements. Dear colleagues, the Istanbul Convention is the most far-reaching international treaty designed for tackling violence against women in and outside the homes. And as a member of the EPP, I am absolutely proud that I am allowed to defend and to promote the 10-year-old convention. Dear colleagues, we are all aware of the misinformation about the convention, misinformation in some of our countries. But there is no hidden agenda. The convention was adopted, let me stress that once again, in consensus by all members of the Council of Europe. And the convention sets out minimum standards on prevention, on protection, and prosecution of violence against women. And if a country wants to do more, then it is allowed. There were and there are many myths about the convention. I got a brochure yesterday from our Ukrainian colleagues. And I also saw the positive judgment in Lithuania. But after all, if we really want a society in which every human being can feel him or herself safe, a society where we all are protected, then we need the protection offered by the enforcement of this convention. Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, I was absolutely disappointed yesterday about the answer given to my colleague Inger Schau from the Hungarian presidency. Because if they want to do more, they can do. I was in 2010-2012 rapporteur in Turkey. I was so proud on their safe houses. And when I see now what they are doing, I am asking them, come back on this issue and come back and allow women to be protected. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. We will now move to Petra Stienen on behalf of the ALDE group. Petra online. Petra, you have the floor. 2 minutes, please.
Dear colleagues, on behalf of the ALDE group,
I would like to ask to call a spade a spade. I see the metaphor shadow pandemic a lot. But violence against women is not a disease, it's not a pandemic. It's a serious human rights violation. And the Istanbul Convention, if you want a medicine, then I think we should have lots of drops of medicine from the Istanbul Convention. Dear colleagues, trying to undermine or leave Human Rights Convention on the basis of upholding family values is adding insult to injury. Because how can anyone argue that it's part of upholding family values to intimidate, assault, beat, stalk, rape, or murder a woman? So will we accept in this House and in our national parliaments the polarizations around misconceptions on the Istanbul Convention? Or will we join forces across the aisle and work together to stop violence against women? Because that would indeed protect the human rights and dignity of all of our families, whatever shape and form they have, all over the Council of Europe member states. The ALDE Group is pleased with the ratification by Liechtenstein and hopes many other states within the Council of Europe and beyond will sign and ratify this important human rights convention. In the ALDE Group, we also believe, since violence against women is predominantly perpetrated by men, men's engagement in combating this human rights violation is crucial. Therefore, I have a special request to the male politicians in this plenary. Look up Article 12.4 of the Istanbul Convention, as it calls on all members of society, especially men and boys, to contribute actively to preventing violence against women. So please, dear male colleagues online and in the hemicycle, take your responsibility and become an ally in ending the worldwide violation of women's rights and convince your governments to uphold, sign, ratify and implement the Istanbul Convention. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to John Howell. You see these little seconds that go over time, and then when you add them up, it makes a lot. We now go to John Howell on behalf of the European Conservatives. John, online, you have the floor, John.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am absolutely committed to the Istanbul Convention, as is the UK government. And we are in the process, as the Secretary General has said, of moving to ratify that. Violence against women seriously violates and impacts or nullifies the enjoyment by women of their human rights, and it should be stamped out as quickly as possible. But in the course of moving towards the ratification of the Istanbul Convention, which we think is an excellent standard, an excellent benchmark from which to proceed, we have come across additional ways of ensuring that the rights of women can be better protected. And the question that I have for all of us to answer is how we can ensure that we make sure that we capture those additional ways of improving the lives of women, to make sure that the Istanbul Convention remains a living document rather than one which just we sign and then we forget about. I understand the frustration that we have not, as a country, yet been able to ratify the convention. But I can reassure everyone that we believe that it is better to change the law first to meet the conditions of the convention, rather than do that as a secondary thing. And as I say, it has been a very instructive process for us in being able to work out additional ways in which we can help to make sure that violence against women remains a thing of the past. Thank you.
Thank you, dear John. We now move to Tini Cox, the chair of the United Left in the room. Tini, you have the floor, 2 minutes.
Opinion, the Istanbul Convention addresses first and foremost men. It is men who use violence against women. It's men who harass, beat, rape and kill wives, mothers, daughters. Women they know well, women they do not know at all. Relatives and strangers, colleagues and subordinates, servants and women who had the bad luck to just passing by. The scale of harassment of women, the number of men who violate women in their integrity and their dignity. It's all enormous and it's all inexcusable. The good news is that most men do not violate men. The bad news is that far too many men still do, and that the numbers 10 years after the start of the Convention to Combat and Prevent Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence are still frightening high and have, especially in the recent COVID crisis, dangerously increased. 10 years ago in this very hemicycle, the then chair of the Committee of Ministers told us that he was delighted that the draft Convention on Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence was transmitted to our Assembly, and that he was eagerly waiting for our opinion so that the Convention could be opened soon for signing by all member states in Istanbul. Some months later, the then President of our Assembly stated that this new Convention was a fundamental consideration, valid for any country and any geographical area in the world. There could not be any real gender equality as long as violence against women would persist. No culture, no religion, no tradition could be used to justify violence and inequality between human beings. Freedom from violence was, the then President said, a basic human right, without which all the other rights would become meaningless. I do thank Ahmet Davutoglu and Mevlut Çavuşoğlu for the wisdom and hope they then expressed in this hemicycle with regard to the enormous importance of our Istanbul Convention. And I do sincerely hope that the wisdom and hope then expressed will keep growing throughout Europe and the world, and will come back to those who now tend to distance themselves from the Istanbul Convention by the now most prominent international standard, which orders men to behave and offers women most needed protection. Nothing more, nothing less. Let us all stand firm for the Istanbul Convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will now turn for a couple of minutes to our panel, so beware, beware. I think that one of the first issues, Mr. Prime Minister, that comes up all the time is about we men need to be involved. So if you could give us a couple of heads-ups of how you see that we as men, and since you've written a book on it, how we can indeed come on board. Please do so in a couple of minutes, not too much, because we got so many things to discuss. You've got the floor.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for the great discussion and the the engagement we're all showing on this topic. Yes, I think that the topic of feminism in the broad sense has for way too long been seen as a topic which is about women, and so only women can give their opinion on. And I think that's wrong for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that, yes, very often the reason why women are not getting the same opportunity as men have is because men play a certain role in it. But also, I think that if only women are allowed to talk or to have an opinion on this topic, it creates very often a blocking mechanism amongst men, which very often would have the feeling like, okay, we are feeling threatened by what is happening, which of course is the wrong perspective. I would actually go further. I think that feminism is a good thing for everyone, and it's also a good thing for men. Women get stereotyped, but men get very often stereotyped as well. And so if you can have a more open discussion, and if you can convince men why this topic is important in a general sense, and if they would not be convinced in a general sense because it's also a good thing for themselves, I think we can get much further, and especially much further on delicate topics such as gender-based violence. Why would we agree with a society where we invest in education for everyone, but then afterwards we would say, well, our ambition is to have the highest educated housewives in the world? What's the benefit of that? What a massive waste of talent this is. What we need is men who want to take the lead in this, and who want to take the lead in this because they understand that they are playing a pivotal role in ending discrimination and in ending gender-based violence. And we see that the things are moving. We see that more and more men are willing to play that role. Willing to play that role because they think it's right for the common good, but also maybe for some of them because they understand that this is not something which is threatening. It's actually something which I think is also liberating for men. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I would like to go to Madam Simonovic overseas, because when we speak about men and their roles, so to say, we head into family values and the way we look at family values. Now, with hindsight, Madam Simonovic, if you allow me to do so, you as one of the drafters of the convention, how would you respond to all those who say that the Istanbul Convention might be or is contrary to family values? Please, in a minute, if possible.
Thank you very much for this question. With respect to this claim that it is against family values, it is basically a claim that is negating human rights in general, because if we look at the human rights area, and especially CEDAW Convention, UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, that all Council of Europe member states have ratified, there is a specific article there on equality within families. So there are human rights of women within families that should be implemented by all Council of Europe member states as members of CEDAW Convention. So those rights are enshrined in other human rights instruments also. And I remember that we have recently commemorated 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action. For preparation of Beijing Platform for Action, 5 years ago, states also had movements against the Beijing Platform for Action as something against the family values. So we are seeing this type of arguments coming from conservative forces that are in general against human rights, including human rights of women and all those excellent principles related to equality between women and men that are enshrined in CEDAW Convention, but also in the Istanbul Convention. And if I may add, with respect to question posed by UK MP, there are other measures for implementation, because GRAVIO and CEDAW Committee as expert mechanisms, as well as my mandate, are living. So we are able to interpret those instruments and to recommend the measures that are addressing specific gaps. So to be very concrete, if any of state is going to claim very specific kind of attack coming from Istanbul Convention with respect to family values, it should be specified. And then we should respond, recalling principles that protecting all persons from domestic violence and women and girls from violence against women. There are specific measures that should be addressed. And with respect to, for example, this area of rape, because I have received inputs from different states from all over the world, but also from Council of Europe member states, altogether 207 inputs. There is clear that in many states, laws are not yet in line with the Istanbul Convention, and they are not in line with the UN CEDAW Convention. So we have a main problem of lack of full implementation. And let me mention that area, for example, of sexual consent. In some Council of Europe member states, still it is possible to have sexual consent of a child of 12 years old. So it is something that is not acceptable. It is not in line with Istanbul Convention. It is not in line with UN CEDAW Convention. And for that reason, I think that it would be very important to challenge such laws, to change them, and to use both instruments jointly. They are improving family values and not against.
Thank you. I do apologize that I have to intervene once in a while, because we can discuss lengthy about it, and of course if the panelists agree we can take 1 or 2 more hours, I would gladly do so. I can tell you that all the members of parliament present will gladly do so. I will now move to our first list of speakers. We will come to some of the other panelists because I've got so many questions already on my list. We will do this as follows, dear colleagues. We will have 10 speakers. Please stay within the 1 minute, because the time you take away from the 1 minute is time you take away from a colleague. 10 members, all in the room except for the last one who will be on board from Mexico. First speaker on my list, la première oratrice sur ma liste, Nicole Triss. Vous êtes dans la salle. Nicole, vous avez la parole. 1 minute.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
La Convention d'Istanbul est l'un des traités les plus importants que le Conseil de l'Europe ait été amené à initier et à élaborer. Il est même qualifié de gold standard par l'ONU. Malheureusement, elle reste un acquis fragile et peine à s'imposer partout. Aujourd'hui, seuls 34 des 47 États membres du Conseil de l'Europe l'ont ratifié. Et au 1er juillet, le premier signataire, la Turquie, devrait s'en retirer, ce que je regrette profondément. Car la triste et froide réalité s'impose à nous tous. Quelques chiffres. Au sein de l'Union européenne, une femme sur 10 a subi une violence sexuelle, 1 sur 20 un viol. 3500 femmes décèdent chaque année sous les coups de leur conjoint ou ex-conjoint en Europe. Dans mon propre pays, c'est tous les 3 jours qu'on assiste à un assassinat de ce type-là. Et les féminicides sont toujours plus sordides et plus choquants, même dans la rue désormais. Alors moi, j'aimerais vous apporter un témoignage de député. Avec plusieurs parlementaires, j'étais référente lors du Grenelle pour lutter contre les violences intraconjugales. Comme mes collègues, j'ai reçu de nombreux témoignages de femmes battues. Nous les appelions entre nous affectueusement les Catherine. Pourquoi les Catherine? Parce que c'était un prénom et c'est toujours un prénom très répandu. Plus de 220 000 Catherine existent en France. Je suis désolée, il faut que je termine parce que ça vient du cœur et il faut absolument le dire, ça. On parle de féminicide, mais on ne parle pas assez de femmes battues. Donc je termine, excusez-moi. C'est le nombre estimé de femmes battues, plus de 220 000 en France. Regardez autour de vous, gardez-vous 2 minutes, regardez un peu les prénoms répandus, que ce soit Maria ou Christine ou Elisabeth, peu importe, et vous comprendrez l'immensité, l'amplitude de ce fléau. Aussi, ce que j'en appelle vraiment à tous les parlementaires et à toutes les personnalités politiques de tout pays, il faut se mobiliser. Cette ratification de la Convention d'Istanbul, c'est une évidence, c'est une urgence, il nous faut être efficace. Merci et excusez-moi.
Merci Nicole, je comprends les émotions, mais je voudrais quand même demander vraiment à toutes et à tous de rester dans la minute puisque c'est du temps, et je comprends entièrement, mais c'est du temps qui va être perdu pour des collègues. We come to the second of our list in the room, Mr. Jallow. 1 minute, you have the floor. Where is Mr. Jallow? 1 minute, please.
Colleagues, when I say I'm a feminist, people will react because I'm a man. But if feminism is the radical idea that women are equal to men, then every sensible man should be a feminist. We need to realize that women's rights are human rights. They are not separate from human rights. They are actual human rights. And we are an institution that supposedly should be safeguarding the principles of democracy and human rights. So as member states, we must live up to our commitment to the principles of equality and human rights and justice for all. And that includes women. The Istanbul Convention is the world's most comprehensive tool for protecting women against violence. It is a result of centuries of struggle for equality for women. Turkey leaving the convention would deprive Turkey and Turkey's women of a vital tool to counter this violence. Let us recall that the purpose of the convention is to prevent violence against women, protect victims, and prosecute perpetrators. It upholds women's fundamental rights to a life free of violence. So I challenge all men in this hemicycle, all men in the member states, all men in the world to take a clear stand against violence against women and to support this very important tool. Thank you very much.
Well, you see, when the heart speaks, it gets tough to stay within the timing, but the heart is more important. But please stay, if possible, within the minute. Not if possible, stay within it. We now have Laima Andrikiene in the room. And Laima, where are you? You have the floor. I don't see Laima. Apparently, we do not have Laima. We move to the next on my list, which is Ingrid Skau. Ingrid, you have the floor.
President and colleagues, the Istanbul Convention is very important. It improves the lives of women and children all over Europe. Yet there are member states that have still not ratified. There are member states that have not signed. And there are even member states withdrawing. This is deeply worrying. It is preventing the Convention from helping as many as it could. And President, our organization is currently chaired by a member state whose parliament has rejected ratification. They argue that their laws give women and children better protection than what implementing the convention would. However, and I ask, what's the problem? However, the convention is a minimum standard. If their laws are in fact better ratifying, would be no problem. I appeal to all Hungarian colleagues present today to take the message from our keynote speaker and the debate back to Hungary. The Istanbul Convention protects families. It must be implemented in national legislation to keep women and children safe. Thank you, President.
Thank you, Ingrid. We now go to Madam Petra Bayer, here in front of me. Petra, you have the floor. 1 minute, please.
If you own a real precious treasure, the gold standards of legal protection of women from all forms of violence, if this treasure doesn't get less if you share it, but in contrast it becomes more potential if you apply it to more people, a real precious and mighty tool to protect women from violence, the more signatures, ratifications and implementations there are, you consider yourself really lucky. We all would unveil ourselves unintelligent if we would not promote and advocate in favor of the Istanbul Convention. It is to protect women from violence, not to interfere in domestic culture, not about to abolish men and women, not to introduce same-sex marriage. No, it's just about the protection of women from all forms of violence. And we must not deprive women of this fundamental human right, nowhere in this world. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. We now move to Dara Cagliari in the room. Dara, you have the floor. Where is Dara? Oh, he is online, but I don't hear it. Dara, you have to put on your mic.
Mr. President, and just to welcome this debate, but let's not get carried away by the 10th anniversary. We have seen in the last 15 months of this pandemic a rise in many countries around the reports of domestic violence. And I would ask the panel if in the context of that experience, they were to update the convention and update on the lessons that we have learned from the pandemic, what would they put into the convention? And I would ask the Prime Minister if he would commit on behalf of all Prime Ministers to give the same level of unity and attention to the pandemic of domestic violence and the pandemic of violence against women as he and his colleague Prime Ministers and governments gave to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much, Dara. We now move to our next speaker, Maria Risotti. I've been told in the room. Maria, you have the floor.
No, don't work? Work. Sono 34 su 47 i paesi del Consiglio d'Europa, ma a 10 anni dalla ratifica della Convenzione di Istanbul c'è un rigurgito di mentalità prevaricatrice nei confronti della donna. E la dimostrazione è il fatto che la Turchia, che l'ha ratificata per prima, si è sfilata e temo che altri ne seguiranno. I fondamentalismi hanno molte facce, la loro paura è la perdita di controllo sulle donne e la loro autodeterminazione. Penso alle 63 bambine e ragazze uccise a Kabul a una scuola poco tempo fa. Penso a Saman Abbas, giovane pakistana di 18 anni uccisa in Italia un mese fa dalla sua famiglia perché aveva rifiutato il matrimonio combinato. I servizi sociali italiani l'avevano protetta e ospitata, ma lei decise di tornare a casa dopo un messaggio ingannevole di sua madre e la sera stessa è stata strangolata. Dedico questo mio intervento a Saman e a tutte le Saman che vivono nei nostri paesi, che vogliono vivere come le loro compagne di scuola, come le nostre figlie, e invece subiscono violenza e spesso la morte per il fondamentalismo, l'integralismo delle loro famiglie e che noi con le nostre leggi non riusciamo ancora a proteggere. Grazie Presidente.
Thank you very much. We now come to our next speaker, who is Elvira Kovac. Elvira, you have the floor.
Thank you, distinguished chair. The sad fact is that in every country in the world,
women experience sexual, physical, and emotional violence. Violence against women is a huge problem. The effects of it are lasting and difficult to overcome. It is a human rights violation which inevitably leads to other violations and therefore makes equal opportunities for women and men impossible to achieve. Domestic violence is a form of gender-based violence, discrimination and denial of equal opportunities. Its victims might not have the chance of reconstructing themselves, of finding a job, another partner, another home. Some of them will not have the chance to survive. Therefore, I believe that it is important that the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe fights for these women's right to have a second chance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now come to Dimitrios Kairidis. Dimitrios, you have the floor. Dimitrios, I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. President. I speak to you this morning humbled, shocked, and appalled, as all my compatriots back home in Greece, by a hideous crime against a young woman, a wife, and a mother of a young child who was recently murdered by her husband, reminding us all of the continuous problem we are faced with. I took the floor to raise my voice against the pressures the Istanbul Convention faces today. Let me be clear, the demographic decline, especially in Eastern Europe, should be no excuse to violate or restrict the rights of women. We can deal with the serious challenge of the demographic decline without violating them in full respect of women's rights and women's dignity today. Let me stress the importance of education as a father of a boy and a girl, how important it is, and ask my colleagues from Turkey. Turkey is a big country, a Muslim majority country, an important country. It should be on board to send a message not only to the women of Turkey, but to all its neighbors around and beyond Europe, how important it is to have it on board. Thank you.
We now go to Mexico, if everything goes well, with our colleague Héctor Vasconcelos. Héctor, ¿estás allá? Héctor, tiene la palabra. Bienvenido.
Very good. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I will avail myself of this occasion to inform you that, first of all, Mexico, you may all not know this, Mexico has been invited to join the Istanbul Convention, and we are well on our way to finishing the internal procedures necessary for the Mexican government to be able to announce officially that Mexico will adopt this convention. We are almost there. I think that very, very soon I will be able to inform you all that Mexico is a member of this convention, and we will do that with great conviction and feeling both pleased and honored by this invitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Héctor. So if everything goes well, Madam Secretary General, we will have Mexico on board, which brings me to you to explain briefly why this convention is not a convention solely to the European, if you wish, geographical space, but it is a convention that indeed goes beyond Europe as such. Please, 2 minutes on this issue.
Thank you very much. Well, now we speak about Istanbul Convention, but let me use this opportunity to say many of our conventions are meant to help either good governance or spreading this area of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law far beyond our borders. And let me say that in cybercrime prevention, it's a case in point. So I'm very pleased to have heard this news that there is an observer state of the Council of Europe engaging on this important path. And I think it speaks by itself. And I think the fact that from the UN point of view, we heard how it's seen as the golden standard
in this area, and at the moment probably the only international treaty dealing with this issue. So it goes without saying that it is offered to all the countries around the globe who are wishing to improve the protection of women against violence and domestic violence. So I can only welcome, and when it was conceived and it was developed, it was meant to mean for women all around the world. And I would be glad to know that we will hear about many more countries to join the Istanbul Convention or to be inspired by the Istanbul Convention to develop their national legislation and implementation of the important work. So I can only commend Mexico for this announcement and look forward to hear more.
Thank you very much. I would like to go now to the Speaker of the Senate. I heard one of our colleagues say, Mr. Prime Minister, that you have to forge a coalition of prime ministers supporting the Istanbul Convention. But I will go now to the Speaker of the Romanian Parliament and ask the question to her. Madam Speaker, would you think it'd be a good idea for you, as our Prime Minister has been invited to make a coalition of Speakers of Parliament supporting the Istanbul Convention, and what would be the elements that you, as a Speaker of a Parliament, would take on board for your parliamentarians to push forward the application, the eradication of violence against women? So please, a couple of reflections on this, and of course I hope you will see that you will start a coalition of Speakers of Parliaments against violence against women. Madam Dragu?
Yes, thank you for the question. Actually, I have already started to set up such a coalition of female speakers of the Senate across Europe, and I had the first conversation with my homologue in Spain, Ms. Pilar Cuenco, and on February 25th, we had the first discussion about how to fight against the gender violence. And then we had an official visit and exchange of views on this topic. And here in Bucharest, in Romania, we get inspired by what the parliament in Spain is doing on this topic. They're more advanced than we are. I had also a similar discussion with the president, the Speaker of the Senate of Belgium, just last week. Also, I had a conversation with the Speaker of the Italian Senate. So we are in a very lucky position to have several female speakers across Europe. And yes, in the second half of the year, we should move ahead with an official, a formal group for promoting Istanbul Convention for fighting gender violence in general. As for what we are doing here in the parliament in Bucharest, in Romania, we are going to monitor through a specialized committee the progress on implementing the Istanbul Convention in Romania. And as I mentioned in my previous intervention, we need clear indicators, policy indicators and outcome indicators, as well as clear budgetary lines. I know when we're talking about budgetary lines, more difficult, but we have to do this and to push forward. And we have also Commissioner Dalli at the European Commission, who is also supporting this, work. Thank you.
Thank you. I will not put the question to my Prime Minister because I know that he will move on having a coalition of Prime Ministers on the Istanbul Convention. Since you are a convinced feminist, as you say, well, let me join your gang, between brackets, as far as that is concerned. We now go back to the Assembly, knowing that we will probably not have all 60 speakers that we have on our list, so I do apologize for that. I'll take the next 10 ones. First on my list is Peter Frick, Monsieur Peter Frick de Liechtenstein, who will be followed by Doreen Massé. Peter, ou Pierre, vous êtes là, vous avez la parole.
Sehr geehrter Herr Vorsitzender, meine Damen und Herren Abgeordnete. Es freut mich, heute in der Parlamentarischen Versammlung im Namen der liechtensteinischen Delegation sprechen zu können. Denn ich darf Ihnen berichten, dass die liechtensteinische Außenministerin Dominik Hasler letzte Woche die Istanbul Convention formell hinterlegt hat. Liechtenstein wird damit der 34. Mitgliedstaat der Istanbul Convention sein und setzt ein wichtiges und starkes Zeichen für den Multilateralismus und den Schutz der Menschenrechte. Mit unserem Einsatz zur Bekämpfung von Gewalt gegen Frauen und häuslicher Gewalt verbessern wir die Situation der Betroffenen in Liechtenstein und betonen gleichzeitig international die Wichtigkeit der Istanbul-Konvention. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren Abgeordnete, es ist eine besondere Freude und ein wichtiger Schritt von Liechtenstein zum 10-jährigen Jubiläum der Istanbul-Konvention, den Ratifikationsprozess abgeschlossen zu haben. Schließen möchte ich mit dem Aufruf an Sie alle, den Einsatz für die Arbeiten des Europarats und den Schutz eines hohen Menschenrechtsstandards zu verstärken. Und im Namen Liechtensteins ermutige ich alle zur Ratifikation der Istanbul-Konvention. Besten Dank.
Danke Ihnen. We now come to Doreen Massey online, and thank you for the ratification. Obviously, there's so many more to come. Doreen Massey, Madame Massey, Ernest Massey, you have the floor. Will be followed by Emina Gunay.
The Istanbul Convention has inspired enormous change. As my colleague John Howell said, signs are good that the UK will ratify the Istanbul Convention soon, according to our Minister for Safeguarding. Earlier this year, we passed a long-awaited act on domestic abuse. The Domestic Abuse Act in Northern Ireland will criminalise psychological violence from this autumn. All good news. And we must continue to press for progress in all directions. We must remain vigilant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now come to Emin Günay, followed by Hanyaka Yuhash. Mrs. Günay, you have the floor. I do not see any movement with Ms. Günay. Oh, I do apologize. I thought you were, my roadmap tells me that you are not here. I do apologize. Please.
Okay, thank you, President.
Sorry about
Dear
that.
colleagues, as a member of Parliament, I'm in favor of Istanbul Convention. But let's remember, it is a framework agreement, and the most important part, how countries take necessary measures and implement these measures and policies. Turkey's withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention doesn't mean that Turkey backslides from its commitment to fight against violence against women and domestic violence. On the contrary, Turkey continues to fight against all forms of violence while keeping in its international cooperation mechanisms through the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Next week, fourth judicial reform strategy focusing on protection of women will be put before the Parliament as a draft bill. And I would like to give a couple of examples from the implementation. The law 2684, the Protection of Family and Prevention of Violence Against Women, launched in 2012, and it covers all types of violence against women and children. And Women's Emergency Support Notification System was launched 2018, and 2.5 million people are using, and 73,000 of these calls, which were real threat, were prevented. So Turkey is dedicated to struggle against violence against women and children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do not believe that any of us think that any of us in the room would not do everything in their means to fight against violence against women. The point is that the Istanbul Convention obviously is a tool to do so. And I would like to recall to all of my colleagues that I did get the engagements of the Speaker of the Turkish Parliament that at one point the Istanbul Convention as such will be debated in the Parliament. I hope that he will hold his word. Now we come to Hanyaka Yuhash in the room, I've been told. Hanyaka, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are on the side of the victims, and I would like to emphasize that the Hungarian government promotes zero tolerance against all forms of violence, particularly applies on the subject of violence against women and domestic violence, which is extremely important. I would like to also recall the Venice Commission opinion that the choice to ratify a treaty and to be bound by its obligations is a sovereign act of a state. Hungary is really committed to protecting women against violence. However, with full respect, we endorse a modestly different approach, meaning we do not deem it appropriate to devise an additional international legal instrument. The Hungarian government committed with a comprehensive package of legislation. We adopted one of the strictest criminal codes in Europe, which gives priority to protection of women and children. We doubled victim support centers and announced last year the Victim Assistance Program. We made domestic violence a criminal offense 1 year before the Istanbul Convention entered into force. We are our own way. We are on the side of victims, and we protect women against domestic violence. This is the most important thing. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. We now come to Beatrice Rovofrescu. I know that our Speaker of the Romanian Parliament will have to leave us in a couple of minutes. Please, for those who are able to do so, stay on board because I've got a number of important questions to put to the panel. Beatrice, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Harcèlement, viol, coups, mutilation génitale, mariage forcé, crime dit d'honneur et même stérilisation sans consentement touchent de nombreuses femmes, quel que soit leur âge, leur catégorie socio-professionnelle. Certes, l'appartenance de certaines d'entre elles à des sociétés fortement patriarcales les rendent encore plus vulnérables. La Convention d'Istanbul a fourni les moyens, par des mécanismes solides, de traduire la volonté politique en actions concrètes. Grâce à elle, de nombreux pays ont initié ou fait évoluer leur législation pour lutter contre la violence à l'égard des femmes. Elle les a conduits à analyser des données, ventilées par âge, sexe, type de violence et auteur. Cette convention majeure a pu créer un élan de solidarité entre nos pays et je voudrais mettre en avant le rôle primordial du réseau parlementaire pour le droit des femmes de vivre sans violence du Conseil de l'Europe, qui prend très à cœur son rôle de think tank et exhausteur de bonnes pratiques. À nous de convaincre, grâce au réseau et grâce à vous, les pays récalcitrants d'adhérer à ce texte normatif majeur de lutte contre la violence basée sur le genre afin de protéger les droits humains. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. We now come to Maria Mezentieva. Maria, you are in the room, I believe. You have the floor. 1 minute.
Merci, le Président. I will take this challenge of 60 seconds to report you back of the developments that were positively outlined by Madam Secretary General in Ukraine. We can proudly say that Ukraine was one of the co-authors of the text of the Istanbul Convention 10 years ago. And now we are going through the same challenge that 34 countries have gone through while signing this document, and 12 of those who finally ratified it. Of course, we cannot forget about the 4 principles stipulated in the Convention. This is prevention, protection, criminal prosecution, and coordination policy. We can reassure you that judges in Ukraine, human rights activists, lawyers, Prosecutor General, who is a woman herself, and all others are supporting this important document. We have conducted 2 beautiful events with the Council of Europe. I salute this House, the prominent Committee on Gender Equality and Non-Discrimination, and I think Ukraine will go forward with the ratification. Merci, le Président.
Merci. We now come to Madame Feleknas. We have 4 more speakers, so please stick to the 1 minute because I still have some tough questions to the panel. Madame Feleknas.
Nachdem die Türkei als Erstunterzeichner der Konvention noch eine Vorreiterrolle bei der Verhinderung von Gewalt gegen Frauen eingenommen hat, hat sie nun mit einem zu nächtlicher Stunde erlassenen Dekret des Staatspräsidenten Erdogans rechtswidrig den Austritt aus der Konvention beschlossen. Hier muss ich sagen, dass die Frauen in der Türkei für die Beibehaltung der Istanbuler Konvention sind und gegen den Beschluss protestieren. Alleine in den letzten 6 Monaten des Jahres sind in der Türkei 177 Feminizide begangen worden. Diese Zahl ist mehr als doppelt so hoch wie vor 10 Jahren. Wir als HDP-Frauenrat haben beim Stadtrat, dem obersten Verwaltungsgericht, die Annullierung des Dekrets beantragt und setzen unsere Aktion in der Öffentlichkeit fort. Auch die Übergriffe der Behörden auf die kurdische Frauenbewegung TJA und weitere Frauenorganisationen hat zugenommen. Wir Frauen hören nicht auf, die Inhalte des Übereinkommens einzufordern. Denn die Bedrohung der weiblichen Existenz beschränkt sich nicht allein auf den Austritt aus der Istanbuler Konvention. Ich appelliere daher an jeden, gegen diese rechtswidrigen Beschlüsse und gegen den Femizid einzustehen. Unser Kampf für eine gewaltfreie und gerechte Welt geht weiter.
Thank you. We now come to Monsieur Damien Cotier en salle. Damien, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le fléau de la violence domestique n'épargne aucun pays. En Suisse, il provoque la mort d'une femme toutes les 2 semaines et demie et il concerne 26 000 enfants chaque année. Monsieur le Président, vous l'avez rappelé tout à l'heure, la Convention d'Istanbul est un instrument puissant avec ses 4 piliers pour lutter contre cette honte. Le gouvernement suisse a présenté vendredi dernier son premier rapport de mise en œuvre. Il y décrit à quel point la Convention d'Istanbul a déclenché une nouvelle dynamique. Cette nouvelle dynamique est essentielle, il faut qu'elle irradie partout. Il faut que les hommes parlent et agissent aussi, et je me réjouis qu'autant d'hommes que de femmes se soient inscrits au débat de ce jour. Il faut que le plus grand nombre de pays adhèrent à la Convention, et je me réjouis de ce qu'on a entendu du Mexique, et je me réjouis qu'un pays, un cher ami, le Liechtenstein, vienne rejoindre cette dynamique. Aux autres, j'aimerais dire « Please join the group » et à ceux qui voudraient s'en aller, j'ai envie de dire « Please stay in the group ».
Merci. Nous en arrivons à Christophe Lacroix en salle. Christophe, vous avez la parole. Voilà, Christophe.
Président, c'est un vrai plaisir de vous revoir d'ailleurs physiquement, toutes et tous, et vous spécialement, Président. Quel triste anniversaire ces 10 ans de la Convention d'Istanbul lorsque l'on voit que la Turquie s'en retire, et que la Pologne va dans la même direction, que la Hongrie émet des doutes également sur la pertinence du multilatéralisme pour lutter contre la violence faite aux femmes. Quel triste 10e anniversaire. Alors que l'on sait très bien que la Convention d'Istanbul, c'est le premier instrument juridiquement contraignant qui offre un cadre global pour lutter contre les violences domestiques faites aux femmes. Notre Premier ministre belge a rappelé à quel point c'était important pour les Belges de lutter contre la violence faite aux femmes. Et quand on voit effectivement les chiffres au niveau mondial, 243 millions de femmes, soit une femme sur 3 qui a subi une violence, 50% des mineurs d'âge ont subi une violence, c'est inacceptable. Et donc ici, je proteste vigoureusement au nom de la Belgique contre la décision de la Turquie et je demande à tous les collègues et toutes les collègues de se rassembler pour offrir un visage nettement meilleur au monde d'aujourd'hui. Merci.
Merci Christophe. Last on my list is Maria Martinez-Ferro. Maria, you have the floor. Maria should be in the room. I don't see Maria. Is she online? No. Okay. Then we will take, given the time, I will now come to the panel. Madame la ministre, je vous surprends là un tout petit peu. Je voudrais vous demander en 2 minutes encore de peut-être nous rappeler quelles sont des mesures concrètes concernant la prévention de la violence et la protection des femmes. S'il vous plaît, en 2 minutes si c'est possible.
Bien sûr, Monsieur le Président, je vais faire très très vite et je veux saluer le Mexique et le Liechtenstein pour rejoindre cette bataille. C'est un vrai plaisir. Vous savez, les choses les plus importantes à faire lorsque une femme est victime de violence, c'est commencer par reconnaître la violence. Beaucoup de femmes encore, lorsqu'elles vont déposer plainte, entendent des questions qu'elles ne devraient pas entendre. Et donc nous, notre approche en France, l'idée c'est d'avoir une approche systémique de ces violences qui consiste d'abord à identifier ces violences, ensuite à les signaler et ensuite trouver des moyens de les traiter. Et c'est pour ça que nous avons beaucoup fait de travail avec la police, que nous avons fait un immense travail avec la justice, que nous travaillons également avec la santé puisque les professionnels sont les premiers en lien avec ces victimes et c'est pour ça que nous permettons aux femmes de déposer plainte au sein des hôpitaux quand elles n'osent pas aller déposer plainte dans les gendarmeries ou dans les commissariats. Et il y a évidemment une grande question d'éducation. Et je salue toutes les prises de parole, y compris celles des hommes. Nous avons besoin des hommes comme alliés, mais nous avons besoin des hommes plus comme des complices. Les alliés sont souvent passifs. Les complices se battent avec nous sur ces questions et je salue toutes les prises de parole des parlementaires sur ces questions. Et puis, nous avons évidemment besoin que les associations sur le travail fassent un travail de fond parce qu'elles sont en relation avec les victimes sur le terrain et elles nous permettent de savoir quelles sont les mesures qu'il faut mettre en place pour répondre à ces derniers kilomètres. Les dispositifs publics sont là, mais les lois ne sont pas toujours suffisantes. Il faut que le traitement soit efficace au plus proche des victimes qui en ont besoin. Et je veux parler aussi de la prévention. Je veux parler, c'est pour ça que nous avons mis en place des centres de prise en charge des auteurs de violences pour que, à la fois, nous puissions éviter de la récidive, que nous les accompagnions psychologiquement, socialement, pour qu'ils prennent conscience de la gravité de leurs actes, parce que tous les hommes ne sont pas toujours conscients de cela, et pour que nous fassions en sorte que les femmes se sentent véritablement protégées. Merci.
Merci, Madame la Ministre. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I now turn to our General Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Zita Gurmai. I mean, it is your task, Zita, as you know, you're a General Rapporteur, to take all of this with you and to motivate us to work even harder as yesterday on the issue. So what are your lessons learned from today?
Thank you very much. Do you know why I'm standing? Because we need all to be standing to save women's lives all around Europe and outside. And this is a great occasion, dear Ministers, Secretary Generals, Prime Ministers, to make sure that what we want, we can achieve. It does not matter how the convention is called, but does matter that we change mentality. And I'm really happy that our president and former president of this assembly and the secretary generals really thought that this is time to have a real wake-up call for Europe and outside. And I'm very, very happy that so many men understood that this is not a fight only for women. This is a fight for the society. So let me tell you just a few thoughts which I got because I try to be a good listener of yours. Yes, we need joint effort. Yes, Istanbul Convention saves lives of women. And don't forget that these women who passed away has families, has little children who we need to take care. Yes, I agree. This is the most ambitious one. And of course, we have the best practices. It's a great mechanism. And of course, the awareness campaign, for which I'm super thankful, it is giving us guidance, what to do and how to do. But dear colleagues, all here around and all those who are the good listeners, you need political will to do and to act so. That's why I believe the 10th anniversary is a great occasion to do so. And of course, cooperation. You spoke about the Gravio, the 17 reports. No better instrument. This is the human rights instrument, gold standard. After 70th anniversary, that was really one of the issues that this assembly should be very, very proud. Women and men, disabled, Roma, anybody who belongs to this society. And of course, what is our main goal? To force coalition with prime ministers. Yes, please go home and tell your prime minister there is an action led by the Belgian prime minister for which we should have a strong clap hands because these men really want to make a changes. Can you do the clap hands for him? Thank you very much. Elvira, the former chair, spoke about solidarity, all people. And of course, you spoke about prevention, protection, criminal prosecution. And of course, you also spoke about serious human rights violation. And of course, again, I really would like to underline the importance of men engagement, which is absolutely crucial. Feminist is a good thing. I am a feminist, and I hope that you all are or will become feminists, but I was born as a feminist. You should know. As my great friend who is doing an amazing job as the president of our committee. And of course, what is this debate really provided us? With a great opportunity, not only to take stock of the last 10 years after the opening of the signature of the EC, of what has been achieved so far, but also to commit to further promoting and supporting its implementation. And we must come away from today with renewed determination to play our part as parliamentarians in putting an end to gender-based violence and making this reality on the ground. And I'm very thankful because some of you spoke about the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, which added an extra burden on women, has led to an increase of violence against women and shed light on the urgency to prevent and combat. Line up for action, that's time for us. And of course, since its entered into force, the Convention has contributed saving lives by calling its state parties to enhance assistance services and make prevention of violence and prosecution of perpetrators priorities some of you spoke about. And of course, the Convention makes clear that violence against women is a matter of public concern. And of course, our Assembly played, thank you very much, dear Rick, an instrumental role in calling for the Convention and by promoting its ratification through national parliaments and through the Parliament Network Free Violence, which I have the honor to coordinate as a general rapporteur. And of course, I can go on and go on, but I really would like to say what we should do. Actively participate in the monitoring procedure. Ensure follow up the proposals made in evaluation report concerning our own countries. Step up efforts to raise awareness of the added value of the Convention and demystify misconceptions that unfortunately are still too prevalent. So I urge you all to pause and think whether you have done enough and what you will now do to respond to this call. I'm not going to speak longer because I have to run to Berlin, but I really wanted to show a strong solidarity for all of you, and women all around Europe needs to do a better care. And COVID-19 really proved that we need to do more. So dear President, I really would like to make a call. Just let's have an action, a good awareness campaign after the 10 years, just to show that we want to save women's life in Europe. Thank you very much.
For those who would even doubt, we have an excellent general rapporteur because the heart is there and this is needed. Je voudrais dire à Madame la Ministre, grand merci d'avoir été avec nous. Je vais admettre, je suis complice. Voilà, c'est admis. I would like to thank our Secretary General for being here with us. Obviously, she's the one who upholds the Istanbul Convention. I also would like to thank Madam Simonovic, so far away. I think in the States for being on board. I also would like to thank Madame Dragou and our Prime Minister De Croo for having been here. I think that this has been an important day to do what? To basically say it might be 10 years ago that we started with the Istanbul Convention. This is not a typical celebration. On the contrary, it is a wake-up call. It is really, as our General Rapporteur has said, and so many, this is a call for action of both men and women. All of us, we should take action because it is needed. We really need to defend this instrument, which is the Istanbul Convention. We respect all opinions, but I think that we should make all efforts to those who might not be convinced today of the added value and the importance of the tool. We will make all the efforts, ladies and gentlemen, to convince them that yes, the Istanbul Convention is the tool to help you to eradicate, at the end of the day, violence against women. I'd like to conclude by John Howell. He said very simply, the Istanbul Convention must be a living document. Well, dear colleagues, it is up to all of us, members of parliament, to ensure that the Istanbul Convention indeed is a living document. Thanks to everyone being present, thanks to everyone on board. And I would just say one thing, let's go to work and make the Istanbul Convention be effective. Thank you very much for today, and we will start working now. Thank you.